Well, we come to my favourite class of the series. No surprises as to why. It happens to be one of my kids' favourites as well. The story of Jael, the displaced wife. But so far we've come on a journey of discovery, haven't we, and understanding, as did Deborah and Barak, that the position they found themselves in was because of faithless leadership. And yet, because they had failed in that leadership, the nation had to remove now the Canaanites from amongst them. And so we saw after 20 years of pressure, Deborah standing up to motivate a man who was hesitant in his duty and responsibilities, who once was held by her hand, was able to go up to the top of a hill with 10,000 men and inspire an army against, was the Canaanites' largest army under the hand of Sisera. And we watched as Barak and his 10,000 men flowed like the water off that river, off that hill, down to deliver the nation from the bondage of Sisera. We watched as they charged down on foot to take Sisera and his army out. And we witnessed as Yahweh responded to Barak's leadership and his men's faithfulness as he opened up the heavens and flooded the Jezreel valley and halted Sisera's advance in their tracks and enabled Barak and his men to take the entire army now on foot in close hand-to-hand combat and wiping them out until it says there was not a man left, or so they thought. And as Barak picked through the battlefield and the destruction that was there, he was looking for one man, and he couldn't find him. He was nowhere to be found because in the confusion of the battle, Sisera had lighted off his chariot and quietly and elusively slipped away unnoticed and sped away on foot. Barak couldn't find him. He was looking for him. And Barak assumed that Sisera was among the chariots of the host as they had madly raced for home to Harosheth of the Gentiles. But the cunning and cowardly warrior was not to be found, because he'd slipped away and was running for his life as fast as his legs could carry him in entirely the opposite direction. He was running. I want you to notice this. Verse 17, however, Sisera fled away on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. And we're told where that tent was because it says in verse 11 of Judges chapter 4, it says Heber the Kenite, he had relocated his tent to the plain of Zanaim, which is by Kedesh. So in the story, here we have the men of the 10,000 men that assembled on to Kadesh Naphtali and went to Mount Tabor. It says Sisera was based at Harosheth Hagoyim, or the Harosheth of the Gentiles. They'd come up the Jezreel Valley, following the river Kishon up to Mount Tabor, and then had escaped all the way through, and the host had chased them all the way back to Harosheth of the Gentiles. But if you notice, you see, Sisera had gone the entire direction to the tent of unto Zanaim. He's running in entirely the opposite direction. But I want you to notice, specifically, he's not just running randomly. He's running, says verse 17, to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. Why was he running there? What was the point of him running to this particular spot? He doesn't run, by the way, to Heber's tent site. No, he runs to Jael's tent. Why? Why did he go there? Well, there's a couple of suggestions. I think the first suggestion is that women had their own tent for their own things. We know that when we look at Genesis chapter 24 with Sarah and Rebekah, when it says that Isaac brought Rebekah to his mother's Sarah's tent and marries her, and he was what's the word that is used? He was comforted concerning his mum's death. It's there in Genesis 31 verse 33 that Leah has her own tent. We notice also in Song of Solomon chapter 1. So women had their own tent. And so he's running specifically to this woman's tent. Why? Because, custom says, Eastern custom was, that the only man allowed in that tent was her husband or her father. Now, the only two men, no other man was allowed in a woman's tent for good reason, right? No man other than the father or the husband. And therefore, if any man was searching for any other random, they wouldn't ever think to go looking into a woman's tent. But there's more, says verse 17. There's more. It's the last place that anyone would look. It's easy, therefore, for Sisera to say to her, when anyone comes looking, you can say, there's no man in here, there's no one in here, you should know that. It's just me. Sisera thought he was safe in that tent. Oh boy, he wasn't. But the other reason the record says there was a specific reason why she was running to that campsite and to that tent is because it says, verse 17, for there was peace between Jael, the king of Hazor, and the house of Heber the Kenite. So there's a peace agreement signed between Jael, king of Canaan, and the house of Heber the Kenite. And we're introduced to two people integral to the story, Heber the Kenite and Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. And the record seems to be at pains to remind us every time we're introduced to Heber to give him a specific title. Don't know if you noticed that. Verse 11, he's called Heber the Kenite. And then when we're introduced again to him in verse 17, she's the wife of Heber the Kenite. Why are we given the information multiple times? We should know he's a Kenite from the first time. But no, the record wants us to remind that this is his title. He's called Heber the Kenite. Well, what do we know about Heber the Kenite? Well, firstly, what do we know about the Kenites? And the answer to that, brothers and sisters, is actually quite a bit. The Kenites were a remarkable family. The word Heber, by the way, means a community. Heber's name itself means a community. It comes from the root word meaning a house in common. The idea of the root word for fellowship. So this man, whose name means effectively a house in common or a community of those that feel the same way, is, says verse 11, going to sever himself from the family that he was connected to. This guy's going to go out solo with his family on his own. So even in his name, the community man is going to become an individual. And he severs himself, it says verse 11, from the rest of the Kenites and pitches his tent unto the plain of Zanaim, which is by Kedesh. He severs himself from the Kenite family and makes his tent in the oaks of Zanaim, as it really means. The plain of Zanaim, the oaks of Zanaim. Heber had separated himself from his own community and the rest of the Kenite family and sought fellowship in another community. Why had Heber done this? Was this a good move? Or was it a bad move? Well, first, perhaps it's worth understanding the history and the origins of the Kenites. So Hobab, we're told in verse 11, Heber the Kenite, which was of the children of Hobab, the father-in-law of Moses. We're given a lot of detail, aren't we? We know that Hobab was the son of Jethro, Moses' father-in-law. Numbers chapter 10, verse 29. And we know that Moses, when he had come out of Egypt, originally sought refuge in Jethro's house in Exodus chapter 2, verse 18, within Midian. And he tended for the flocks of Jethro, remember, on the backside of the desert in Horeb for 40 years. And as is often the case when you rub shoulders in a certain family, he ends up falling in love with one of the daughters. Moses marries Zipporah, one of Jethro's 7 daughters in Exodus chapter 2, verse 21. And we know that Moses had left Zipporah and her 2 sons, Moses' 2 sons, in Horeb. God had said in Exodus 3, you will know I'm with you because you'll bring the nation of Israel back to this spot. And so when Moses goes back to Pharaoh, releases the nation of Israel and brings them, he comes back to Jethro's family in the wilderness to pick up his wife and 2 boys. And what we know in the story, we don't have time to turn it up, but Jethro, we know, embraces the hope of Israel, rejoicing in their deliverance and offers burnt offerings and sacrifices with Moses and the nation of Israel in Exodus chapter 18 and verses 9 to 12. He joins to the nation of Israel in worshipping Yahweh and serving him. He was a priest, remember, in Midian. And so he offers, Moses is talking to him a lot about the challenges that he's facing of looking after the people, and he's the one that's offering invaluable solutions to Moses to try and ease the workload. The 70 elders think about how to administer the nation. Look at all of these things. And he tries to help Moses manage the nation's needs in Exodus chapter 18. But Hobab, Jethro's son, journeys a little way with Moses and the children of Israel towards the promised land. Come with me to Numbers chapter 10 very quickly. They're going to journey a little bit, and Moses is going to plead with Hobab. He's going to say to him, hey, Numbers chapter 10, verse 29. Numbers 10 verse 29, it says that Moses says unto Hobab, the son of Raguel, the Midianite, or Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, we are journeying unto the place of which Yahweh hath said, I will give it you. Come thou with us, and we will do thee good, for Yahweh hath spoken good concerning Israel. Moses says, I need you to come with us. You come with us. We're journeying to the promised land. Come with us, Hobab. You'll be invaluable to us. But Hobab says to him in verse 30, no, I'm not going to go. I will not go. I'll depart into my own hand, into my own country. I'm not going to leave all my family, he says. We're a community. We're a community. And he said, leave us not, I pray thee, for as much as thou knowest how we are to encamp in the wilderness, I want you to come with us because you know this place like the back of your hand. You can be, maybe that thou mayest be to us instead of eyes. You know this place. You can see it out. Just tuck that away in your brain for a minute. You will be eyes for us, he says. And so it says the nation of Israel departed, and it would appear almost if we left with Numbers chapter 10 that Hobab refused. But what we know, brothers and sisters, is that subsequent to that story, come to Judges chapter 1, that they did come, that Moses was a better salesman than perhaps what Numbers 10 might suggest, because they did come with the nation of Israel. Well, at least some of them did, because it says in Judges chapter 1 and verse 16, when Judah had gone up to take their inheritances, it says in Judges chapter 1 and verse 16 that the children of the Kenite, Moses' father-in-law, went up out of the city of palm trees with the children of Judah into the wilderness of Judah, which lieth to the south of Arad. And they went and dwelt among the people. So they must have come with Judah. They reconsidered the position. And so we find the Kenites came and dwelt in the inheritance of Judah, although be it maintaining some of their independence. And where they went, brothers and sisters and young people, was they relocated to the wilderness in the south, in the Negev desert, in the inheritance of Judah. But they went and dwelt among the people. It means they fellowshipped with the children of Judah. And so in summary, brothers and sisters, the Kenites were a God-fearing people. They had close ties with the nation of Israel by marriage and by association. They had an ongoing fellowship, therefore, with the land of promise and had gone with Judah and fellowship together into the Negev. And they were to be the eyes or the watchmen for the nation of Israel. And do you know what's remarkable about this family? Is that they end up becoming even more faithful than the rest of the nation of Israel. Because, here we go, 260 years later, in the time of Saul, King Saul, we find that the Kenites, when Saul's out to kill anyone who's turned against them, the Kenites are spared because they're connected to the nation of Israel. They're faithful in fellowship with the nation. And 290 years later, in the time of David, so I'll give you the quote. 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 6. I probably should put it on the overview. 260 years later, in the time of Saul, 1 Samuel 15, verse 6, says that they were faithful to Israel and therefore spared the destruction due to their relationship with the nation. 290 years later, in the time of David, in 1 Chronicles, in chapter 2 and verse 55, this family, while still Kenites, became known as the Rechabites. 1 Chronicles 2, verse 55. And they became known in the land of Israel as Bible students. They were scribes. They followed the law. This family was a faithful family. First of Chronicles 2, verse 55. 450 years later, in the time of Jehu, in the northern 10 tribes, some of the families still remained. 2 Kings chapter 10 and verse 15, Jehu comes across this family, 2 Kings 10:15, that were known for keeping the law and standing against apostasy and maintaining a pilgrim status amongst the land. 450 years this family is faithful, when the nation had gone a-whoring after the gods of the Canaanites and the nations that were around them. But even more impressive, from generation to generation, this family remained faithful to the time at least of Jehoiakim, 740 years after this event or thereabouts. In Jeremiah, in chapter 35 and verse 2, it tells us that this family remained separate from the apostate Judah, who were following every other idol you can think of. This family maintained the law still, remaining steadfast to the truth. This family was not only more faithful than Israel, but they were more faithful than Judah. It's remarkable that this family lasted for so long. Their faithfulness handed from generation to generation in the way that they maintained the law and kept it faithfully when everyone around them fell apart. So come back to the story in Judges chapter 4, and let's come back and ask this question. If this man, Heber, whose name means fellowship, had decided that he would relocate his family to the northern parts of the Oaks of Sinaim, miles away from the fellowship of his family, what did you think? That was a good idea? In the record it says in Judges chapter 4 and verse 11, and it's a great translation actually in the King James, it says that he had severed himself. He had cut all ties to his family, the rest of the Kenites that were living in the Negev, and had re-established them in the northern parts of Israel, right next to the inheritance of Naphtali, about 12 k's from Mount Tabor. Why had Heber done this? On what basis did he think that this was a good idea? Well, was it for climate? Was it for health? Was it for a better environment? Did he have a falling out with his family? We're not quite sure. But if I said to you that there was another man that also severed himself from his family and pitched his tent in the plain and made peace with the surrounding nations, who might you think of? You see, I think the record is painting for us in the Bible echo that this man did a lot. This man, well, he didn't do a lot. He just did a lot. So his man was following almost in the same way, for the same reasons that Lot moved to Sodom, or moved towards Sodom and then ended up in Sodom. This man, Heber, had done the same thing. They both severed themselves from faithful families. It's exactly the same word in the Hebrew. They both pitched their tents towards the plain, and it says they both make peace with the surrounding nations. And what we know is that Lot had separated himself from Abraham to seek economic prosperity. Oh, it's like, it's the garden of, it's well watered. It's like the garden of the Lord. As you come there, you just kick the soil and the water's there. It's unreal. The rich, fertile soils of the plain of Sodom. It was an economic decision for Lot, for a better lifestyle. And brothers and sisters, what happened to Lot? I'll tell you what happened to Lot. He threw his lot in with the wrong lot and lost a lot. You see, this man made a bad decision for his family and lost them all. Do you know it's going to be no different almost for Heber? Lot lost his wife, Heber lost her husband. Suggested, not proved. He's not there the time of Sisera, when Sisera comes to the tent. Why not? Well, I think Heber had moved for employment. What's the proof? The word Kenite means to be a smith. Not just a normal smith that lived next door. These were a nomadic group of metal workers. The Kenites were a group of nomadic metal workers. These were panel beaters, panel bashers. These could make anything you like out of metal. Here's the question. If you were a metal worker, where would you go for employment in Israel? Well, we know that in Israel there was no need for fitters and turners, or there was any need for any form of armour manufacturing, because Judges chapter 5 in verse 8 says, they chose new gods, then there was war in their gates. Was there a shield or a spear seen amongst any of the 40,000 of Israel? There was no need for metal in any of the nation of Israel. They didn't have any weapons. But where would you go if you were a metal worker? The answer is to the guy that would have a need for it with 900 chariots of iron. Brothers and sisters and young people believe Heber had relocated up north for a more prosperous lifestyle. More money, better prospects, and perhaps now we suggest why Jael has access to a workman's hammer. But the other reason that and here's the other question that you have to ask in terms of this family. Look what it says in verse 17. Sisera ran away on his feet to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, because, and here's the reason, there was a peace accord between Jael, king of Hazor, and the house of Heber the Kenite. There was a peace accord. A peace accord. He had a policy, a protection policy, an insurance policy on his life. He had life insurance with Jael, king of Canaan. There was a peace accord signed. Who signs peace accords? Oh, usually it's heads of states. But we're just talking about little old Heber the Kenite. How did little old Heber the Kenite have such authority with Jael, king of Canaan, the king of the empire of the northern part of Israel? On what basis did this boy have that kind of power or authority with this man? He didn't have more power. He didn't have more money. But I suggest you he had some skills. Jael and Sisera needed these skills. Remember, where did Sisera live? He lived in Harosheth of the Gentiles, Sisera's workshop city for mechanics, you see. The city of metal workers, mechanical workers, artificers of brass and iron. I believe, brothers and sisters, this man had skills that Jael and Sisera needed. There was a peace accord between this family on the basis of trade and mutual benefit. It's quite possibly Heber was the chief mechanic in Sisera's army who had work in Harosheth of the Gentiles. That's why I think Jael has access to a workman's hammer. And so we have the Kenite, who ought to have been the eyes for Israel. Do you know what? He severs himself from his brothers and sisters in the tribe of Judah. And do you know what? It's the eyes of this family that sell Israel out. Because it says in verse 12 of Judges chapter 4 that the family of Heber the Kenite, it says that they showed Sisera that Barak the son of Abinoam had gone up to Mount Tabor. This family becomes traitor to the nation of Israel. They showed Sisera. Heber had been watching Barak as he'd called for his assistance. He'd witnessed the massing of his supporters and the fact that they ascended Mount Tabor. And instead of watching out for Israel, as Numbers 10 suggests that Moses requested, he sells them out. See, I think, brothers and sisters, Heber had relocated for better economic prosperity for himself and for his family. He made his decision on the basis of better career prospects, more employment opportunities, and in so doing, had relocated his wife and his entire family and severing them off from the fellowship of the faithful Kenites. It was a disastrous decision. And here's the lesson for us, isn't it, brothers and sisters? True leaders, when it comes to leadership of our families, factor in all the costs. Employment is needed to eat. We know. We must maintain ourselves in order of this life in order to eat. It's important we do the best that we do at all that we do. However, 1 Timothy 6, verses 9 to 11 says, the pursuit and love of money is the root of all evil. See, everything in life comes at a cost, doesn't it? There are always opportunity costs, the cost of the next best alternative. The opportunity cost is the benefit forfeited to take another course of action. And there are trade-offs that we make in life. And if we change jobs, one of the questions we have to ask ourselves is, what is it going to cost me? If I change my career, what is it going to cost me and my family? If I take that promotion, how much more time is it going to cost me and my family? How much more travel might I have to do? What is it going to cost me? In respect to employment, generally in my experience, more money comes with more responsibility, which usually means more stress and less time. I'm not saying that promotion is a bad thing. I'm saying that we have to factor all the costs. That's why I think Timothy, when Paul writes to Timothy, he says, godliness with contentment is great gain. It's worth a lot more. So we've got to be careful about the decisions that we make, both in our choices of leisure, our economic pursuits, the things we do with our family, to ensure that we factor all the opportunity costs. And this man, Heber, as with Lot, failed to factor in all the costs. You know, for Lot, he lost everything. His family, his wife, and he ended up living as a hermit in a cave. And I don't think Heber survived after this battle. No proof, but just a suggestion. We've got to factor in all the costs. And so, back in the story, in Judges chapter 4, says verse 17, Sisera had dropped off his distinctive chariot, and in the confusion was running for his life as fast as he could. He'd run his skin off as he walked into this tent. The ultimate destination was likely to be Hazor, but he needed a place to lie low for shelter and protection on the way until the heat of the search for him had probably subsided. And so then after that, he'd sneak up to Hazor. And so heading for familiar ground with the people he knew that were allies of his, for they had showed him what Barak was doing, Sisera struck out to Heber's campsite, and particularly to Jael's tent. But if Sisera thought he was going to find a soft woman that was going to give sympathy, he had really picked the wrong woman on the wrong day in the wrong tent. Because he comes face to face with the goat. One of the greatest women of all time. Jael. She's the wife of Heber the Kenite. There's nothing soft and gentle about this woman, that don't let the picture fool you. This woman had hair on the back of her hand. She was a goat. So, growing up as a nomad in the desert with their tents, the Kenites were a hardy set of people. Her name means a mountain goat. What we find when you go through history and you look at how they used to live, they all lived in goatskin's tent. She's going to serve Sisera goat's milk, probably from a goatskin bottle like the Gibeonites would have used, and likely covering him with a goatskin blanket. Everything about this woman was goaty. All right? She was everything rugged and rough. She was used to the harsh, rugged living conditions of her nomadic existence, enduring hardships and isolation. This woman knew what life was about. And together, Heber and Jael are portrayed in profile as, guess what, I think, the antithesis of each other, the entire opposite for what they both stood for. You see, I think that Heber was a person who wanted to live on the plain, wanted to make peace with the enemy, wanted economic prosperity, wanted to be surrounded by civilization. This was the latte drinking salesperson, city slicker, ultra personality. Jael, on the other hand, entirely the opposite. You see, goats love the high country away from everyone else. She's a mountain goat. She's going to fight for her territory and mark her space. They're going to be used to entire hardship and ideally used to isolation. And she wants to be a nomad. You see, whereas Heber had made the decision for a better lifestyle with more money and improved living conditions with an insurance policy, I think Jael didn't like that decision. I think the evidence was in the tent. She wasn't happy. Jael wanted the nomadic existence in isolation without all the complications and the trappings of this new employment. And I think whilst Heber had severed himself from his brethren in the pursuit of a better way of life, Jael had not agreed necessarily to go. But in submission, she'd gone. Utterly repulsed by the treachery of the peace accord. But because she obeyed her husband, she bided her time to show him just how he felt. And then her time came. Look what it says in verse 18 as Sisera ran past her tent. It was almost as if he might run past. Look what it says. In Jael it says, went out to meet Sisera. It's quite an interesting statement, isn't it? She went out to meet him. Oh, there was going to be no possibility that Sisera could run past this tent. She goes out and says, just in case, it was a deliberate action. She recognizes him from a distance. And making sure that he doesn't run past, she decides to interact with him. Oh, Sisera, come in here. Here, I've got something for you. It's got your name on it. I'll tell you about it later. Right? Come in. Look what she says. Turn in, my lord. Turn in to me. Fear not. You got to see it, don't you? It's just, she had it all worked out. As I said, she's a goat. She's a clever woman. So when he had turned in unto her into the tent, she covered him with a mantle or a blanket, a rug or a blanket. Turn in, my lord, my ruler, Adon, ruler, a term of respect. She carefully and deliberately encourages him to find sanctuary in her tent. This was her opportunity. Come in quickly, she says. Picture the scene. Sisera, as I said, just run his skin off. He's covered in blood, covered in mud, sweaty, fatigued, scared stiff. For the first time, he's probably lost a battle in his life. What is he doing? He's petrified. He's lost all his men, right? And here was a woman he knew whose allegiances he thought were clearly aligned to him. This was a family that had given the tip-off in the first place. One we had a peace accord. This would offer him perfect shelter. This was where he was going to anyway. I'll lie low here until the heat blows over. So he turns aside and she carefully, lovingly covers him with a blanket. You saw her see him just rocking the bed almost, She covers him. It's likely to be winter time. It only floods, by the way, in winter. So it could be winter time. He's probably shivering uncontrollably as the shock, as the adrenaline leaves his body. And so she puts this mantle, a thick blanket over him to conceal him and also to warm him, usually made of goat skin. Coarse goats here. And as he lay down, Sisera realized he's absolutely parched, right? Oh, he says, I pray thee. Look at these terms of respect. Turn in, my lord. And then Sisera in return, I pray thee. They thought they were in great mutual terms. Oh, yeah, not likely. So I pray thee, a little water to drink, for I'm thirsty. Oh, she says, no, not water for you, my lord. So Sisera is given, it says in Deborah's song, only the best. Only the best. Now look at her hospitality. Water, surely not. How about something more substantial? Judges chapter 5 says, he asked for water, verse 25, and she gave him milk and brought forth butter in a lordly dish. I was just having a joke with the teenagers. It's like, does mum and dad have like special china for Sunday mornings or for visitors that you're not allowed to touch, And this was the special crockery and cutlery that were being used. She brings out a lordly dish, a dish of the nobles. This was the fine china, right? And she brings him butter. It's curdled milk, not just milk. This is the best. This is the creme of the creme. Only the best for you, my lord. And as she lay down, you can imagine that the milk that she gave him Didn't come from a cow. Ain't no grass up there, really, is there? She gives him likely to be goat's milk. She opens a new bottle for the occasion, probably out of, if the Gibeonite story is anything to go by in Joshua 9, from a goat skin container. And she covers him again. Sisera was in Jael's territory and in her ultimate control. And Sisera had no idea just how out of his depth he was. But being ever weary, Sisera has one more request. She's got this false sense of security. And as the sedative of the milk sets in, she says, just as he's drifting off to sleep, God, just one more request. Verse 20, stand in the door of the tent, and it shall be, when any man does say, or inquire of thee and say, is there any man here? You can say, no. You can hear it just as he's drifting off to sleep. Just say no. And of course she gives him his reassurance. I'll say no, all right, don't worry. And so Sisera, having his fears removed, his adrenaline subsiding, and the milk working as a natural sedative on his heavily fatigued body, he falls fast asleep out of sheer exhaustion. And it's at this moment that Jael seizes her opportunity to strike. And look what she chooses to take as the implements for her murder. It says she takes the tent peg and a workman's hammer. Now, brothers and sisters and young people, without wanting to get too gross, when you talk to detectives going to investigate murder scenes, the thing they often say is that they go looking for telltale signs of revenge. They look for crimes of passion first because they are the easiest to spot. So if someone's been run over by a car and there is a revenge or retribution, the car's likely to be either taken, burnt, destroyed, or smashed. And so they look for matching things that might occur as poetic retribution. Now, I'm going to suggest to you, brothers and sisters, that this woman had the memory of an elephant. That this wasn't just a random act of violence, but that this truly was a crime of passion. This was a premeditated murder. She had planned this in her head for a very long time. You see, she takes a tent peg and a workman's hammer. Why does she take things? I don't know if you've ever thought about, no, let's not go there. But if you're going to murder somebody, you wouldn't use a tent peg and a hammer, would you? You'd use a knife, you'd use a gun, you'd use something else. Not that I've ever thought about it. But you wouldn't choose to use these. Why does she choose a tent peg and a workman's hammer? And by the way, any idea that we might have of a little metal pole that we use for tenting, is throw that out the door. This was a tent used in a desert for putting huge tents down. I don't know if you've been to the circus recently. Have you seen the tent pegs that the circus use? They usually stand about this high, about this wide. Right? This wasn't just a nice little thing where you tap, tap, tap through the temple. Oh, no. No. This was something much bigger and much worse. See, I think this was a crime of passion. You see, because I think she chooses the two things that represented her frustration for what had happened in her life. You see, you get a colouring in pencil, and we're told it's a nail of the tent, I believe, for good reason. We're told that this man, verse 11, had pitched his tent. Verse 17, that Sisera had fled away to the tent of Jael. That when she went into the tent, she covered him, verse 18. Stand in the door of the tent, verse 20. Everything about this family was about their tenting existence. Ah, she says, you made me move. I'm going to knock your block off with the one thing that frustrated me the most, having to relocate from my family. And the other thing that I'm going to give you a piece of my mind with is the other reason for why you made me move. And that is for Heber's employment. And that, my friend, is a workman's hammer. It's called the workman's hammer, the symbol of her husband's employment, I believe, used for foundry work with metal, one of Heber's tools. She chooses these two tool implements to exact her crime of passion in her fury and vengeance and frustration on Sisera in retribution for the pain and torment he had brought upon her family for Heber's severance from the Kenite family for having to relocate him from their fellowship with Judah and their home of Israel. It had taken a huge toll on her, and she was going to show him exactly what she thought. And note what she does. Verse 21. She tiptoes over to him. The only time she's probably ever gone softly in her life. Went softly unto him with the hammer in her hand and smote the nail into his temples and fastened it to the ground, for he was fast asleep and weary, and so he died. And when we reconcile, brothers and sisters, the story of Judges chapter 4 with Deborah's song in Judges chapter 5, it was probably a little bit different. Judges chapter 4 just gives us a bit of the detail as to what Barak found when he came into the tent. But Deborah and Barak are going to sing in their song and give us a little bit more insight, because it says in verse 26 of Judges chapter 5, she put her hand to the nail and her right hand to the workman's hammer, and with the hammer she smote Sisera. She smote off his head when she had pierced and stricken through the temples. At her feet he bowed, he fell down. He lay down. At her feet he bowed, he fell, and where he bowed, there he fell down dead. Now, when you go into the Hebrew, what I think Deborah is trying to describe is what actually sort of happened in the story. Because it appears that it all happened in this flurry of activity. That firstly she picked up the hammer and banged him over the head. Because in the Hebrew it really means to smite with a hammer, to smite in pieces, to smite through, to smite or to dash in pieces, to pierce or bore through, in the order. And I think that what we're being told is there's a lot more going on. That first she hit him over the head with a hammer, and as she did so, he reared up. And in her scared, sort of almost panic state, she hits him again and again, knocking him out. And then she grabs the tent peg and drove it through his temples, repeatedly hitting him in a frenzied attack until his head finally pinned him to the floor, and has kept smashing it until his head probably almost fell off his body. Then and only then, in her adrenaline-fueled state, she stopped. And there, lying at her feet, lay Sisera in his own blood, pinned to the floor. And in this was poetic justice, because that was what he had done to her. She had pinned him in a spot that she never wanted to be. She felt trapped. She felt had. And in retribution, Jael enacts out on what the deceitful agreement of peace and a better lifestyle had done to her. And see, whilst Jabin and Sisera's peace accord and employment proposition had offered Heber the freedom and opportunity to do what he wanted to achieve in his life, it had fastened and caused Jael to be pinned to the place she never wanted to be in the first place. And in her action, brothers and sisters, she fulfills the prophecy of Deborah. Yahweh shall sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. And with the hammer and the tent peg in her hand, it says, she destroyed him. Notice where she hit him. The record says that she pinned him through the temples. Why does she put the nail through the temples? Could have said she just put it through his head. No, she put it through the temples. Why the detail? Well, I think the first reason, not to be too gross, is that it's the ease of penetration. It's the easiest point in the head to go through. You can't go through the forehead. It's the hardest bit. The flattest part of the head, when you're sleeping on your side, is probably the easiest accessible, but it's the softest and thinnest part of the head. There's no bone to contend with. But in the scriptures, brothers and sisters, the temples, that word is only used 2 other times in Song of Solomon. In Song of Solomon chapter 4 verse 3 and chapter 6 verse 7, where it's likened to a piece of pomegranate. It's red on the outside and white on the inside, and it's full of seeds, just like the brain. I think, brothers and sisters, what we're being told is that Jael attempted not only to destroy Sisera, but to take out the thinking of this man, that his actions and motives in mental thinking might never be longer able to dominate or capture anyone else again. She punched a 10-peg through both temples and pinned him to the ground, that his brain might never escape anymore. She had to kill him in 2 stages. She knocked him first on the head with a hammer and pegged him through. Here is the story of David and Goliath, the story of the image of Daniel 2, the stone that hit the image, the stone that hit Goliath, the cutting off of his head. There was going to be a 2-stage process. If we're ever going to overcome our enemies, it requires us to totally and utterly eradicate them from our lives. It requires 2 stages. The hitting of the head and then the cutting it off. It's very symbolic, isn't it, brothers and sisters, of the 2 stages that was going to happen. And of course, brothers and sisters, when we think about the work of our Lord Jesus Christ, we often talk about the crucifixion, don't we, brothers and sisters, from the perspective that if Sisera represents King Sin, here in the moment, Jael represents the work of the Lord Jesus Christ. And we talk about the crucifixion. We often say, see, Christ died on the cross, and it was in this moment that the serpent bit him on the heel. But brothers and sisters, what we want to also see in this story is that it was in that moment the serpent's head was crushed and pulverized. And in that tent, when Barak comes past and opens the door, and Jael walks out of the tent, what do you think she looked like? Wasn't one just neat operation where they took off all the disposable plastic PPE gear and dumped it in the bin? She was evidence when she walked out of that tent what had happened in there. She was covered from head to toe with blood and brain tissue all over her. That was what was required to overcome sin. A frenzied attack of crime and passion, brothers and sisters. It required a focused and frenetic effort to destroy the thinking of the flesh. And that, brothers and sisters, is what required of each and every one of us every day. It requires that degree of effort, that degree of determination. So, brothers and sisters, back on the battlefield, Barak realizes Sisera's escaped. And finding the evidence of Sisera's subtle retreat, he sets off in hot pursuit, verse 22. And behold, it says, as Barak pursued Sisera, Jael came out to meet him. It's coloured in those 2 words. Jael went out, verse 18, to meet Sisera, and now she goes out to meet Barak. And finding the evidence of where Sisera had gone, it says that she came. And you can imagine as Barak comes round the corner, that emerging from the tent stood a woman, the hammer most likely still dangling in her hand, covered from head to toe, with her eyes wild, her hair a mess, her eyes bloodshot, yet humble in victory. Look what she says. Oh, if you haven't got a Bible echo to Revelation, come and I will show thee the man whom thou seekest. Come up and I'll show you this scene. You can imagine first the shock for Barak, and then of seeing Jael in this state, and then as he peers through the tent, the murder scene that he witnesses, Sisera lay dead, and there the nail straight through his head, stuck into the ground. There was no doubt in Barak's mind who'd killed him. And Deborah's words would have shot through his brain, wouldn't they? Not quite like a nail, but this is what Deborah had meant. I will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman, just as had been prophesied. And you know, brothers and sisters, I think this is the most remarkable thing in the story. Because it says in verse 23, so God subdued on that day Jabin, king of Canaan. What do you mean? I thought we were talking about Sisera. I thought we were talking about the destruction of Sisera. No, it says verse 23 that God subdued on that day Jabin, king of Canaan. What are we being told, brothers and sisters? Well, I think we're being told this, that Barak all of a sudden now knows and gets the utter conviction that it was God, as Deborah had said, who had fought for them, and God would deliver them. And God had delivered already the entire host of Sisera into the hand. And it would be God that had worked through Jael to slay Sisera. And it all fell into place. For this is the day which Yahweh had delivered Sisera into the hand. Has not Yahweh gone out before thee? And you know what it does, brothers and sisters and young people, is it galvanizes Barak to lead by example. And he gathers the rest of the nation of Israel together and goes after Jabin and all the territory. The carefully chosen wise words of the prophetess rang now so loudly in Barak's ears that he finally realizes the lesson that Deborah and Jael had been trying to teach him all along, that God was with him, that God could use anyone. It just required trust and faith in him. And so what he does in verse 24, it says that the hand of the children of Israel prospered and prevailed against Jabin, the king of Canaan, until they had destroyed him, Jabin, king of Canaan. The hand of the children of Israel prospered and prevailed. It means that the hand of the children prospered and prevailed. It was went and was hard. It was severe. They went hard at it, brothers and sisters, to recover the territory that Jabin had stolen from them. You see, the battle of Sisera was only but the prelude to the main event. Deborah's going to sing about this in her song in chapter 5, which we'll have a look at later. You see, the battle against Sisera was only the start. They had yet to finish all that their fathers and their faithless parents had failed to complete. They had to get cracking. They had to follow it. Whilst the battle was won, Barak now has to reverse the 20-year oppression and finally take their territory. For 20 years they had mightily oppressed them. And here it says that the hand of the children of Israel was severe against Jabin, king of Canaan, until they had utterly destroyed him. You see, now under Barak's leadership, he led his people to completely overthrow Jabin, king of Canaan. You see, it didn't end with Sisera's death, brothers and sisters. It ended when they had finally fulfilled all their faithless parents had failed to complete in Judges chapter 1. But you know what? I want you to notice something utterly remarkable about this story. And I ask you a question. Where is Barak in this story? Get the right slide. Where's Barak in this story? Barak's not there. He was leading them, of course. But who does the record point out subdued and destroyed the Jabin, king of Canaan? The answer is the hand of the children of Israel. Brothers and sisters, I believe that Barak learned the fundamental lesson of true leadership at this point. You see, whilst Deborah had inspired Barak, Barak had now inspired the nation of Israel. A hesitant commander was given faith and conviction. To give faith to a hesitant Israel who now had faith and conviction. And now Barak steps aside to allow the nation to absolutely take back the territory. He realized that leadership is about service, not about glory. God will use anyone. He'll sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. Doesn't matter who it is. He'll use anyone. It's not about glory. You see, Deborah and Yahweh taught Barak on that day that in order for God to be honoured or glorified, self, pride, and human achievement had to be brought into subjection. It had to be brought into subjection, brothers and sisters, that might motivate others to take the lead in their own lives, to give glory to God, that God's purpose might live in them. And to Barak's credit, brothers and sisters, that's exactly what he does. He steps aside, motivated by Deborah's inspiration and support, and propelled by Jael's loyalty and her actions, and encouraged by the entire nation's willingness and selfless attitude, Barak leads captivity captive and completed what had for 80 years been left undone due to the faithlessness of his parents. And in a humble and confident way, knowing Yahweh was with him, he allowed the nation of Israel to work as they personalized the truth for themselves, that God might bring about his purpose with his people. It was a remarkable, remarkable thing that we can learn. And you know what, brothers and sisters? It was through these two women that the land was because of the faithlessness of their parents, that the land that had flowed with milk and honey had dried up. And yet because of the faithfulness of these two women, a goat and a beef, God allows his land once more to flow with milk and honey. What a remarkable lesson we have in these remarkable ladies, brothers and sisters, who show their leadership in the way in which they honour God's roles in both their marriage and their life. May we learn these lessons as we endeavour to grow in God's grace, so that we can seize our inheritance too when Christ comes.